Red and blue lights painted the parking lot in restless flashes. My daughter stood beside her car trembling, her hands clutching her disability placard like it was a confession instead of proof. Across from her, a woman in oversized sunglasses barked into her phone, the kind of voice that carried authority without ever earning it. "Yes, officer, she's lying. She doesn't even look handicapped. These people fake it all the time." Her name was Karen, though I didn't know it yet. I only knew the sound of cruelty, that shrill blend of righteousness and ignorance. Two officers stepped out of their cruiser, unsure of what scene they'd just walked into. My daughter's face was wet, her breath short. "I have the permit," she stammered. "It's on the mirror." "I'm not faking." Karen folded her arms, sneering. "Oh, please. She walked here just fine. I have video evidence. That was when I pulled in. I saw the flashing lights, the small crowd forming. The shame my daughter didn't deserve." "Dad," she whispered, voice breaking. "She said I'm stealing from real disabled people." I stepped forward. Every word measured, every heartbeat slow. "No," I said quietly. "She just can't see what she refuses to understand." Karen turned, triumphant, thinking she'd won. She had no idea the real investigation was about to begin. Before that night, our life was built on quiet discipline and small victories. I'm Daniel Reeves, father to Sophie, 19 years old, bright, compassionate, stubborn in the best ways. She was diagnosed at 15 with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, a neurological condition that makes standing for long periods dangerous. From the outside, she looks healthy, radiant even, but her body tells a different story when the world stops watching. Sophie doesn't complain. She plans. She rests when she needs to, hydrates, tracks her pulse. We live in a world that demands proof for every ounce of struggle, and she's learned to smile through that demand. Our neighborhood, Maple Grove, is the kind of place where image matters more than empathy. Perfect lawns, white fences, HOA newsletters reminding everyone to keep things uniform. The people wave, but it's the kind of wave that ends at the wrist. Polite, performative, distant. Across the street lives Karen Walsh, mid-50s, single self-appointed defender of community order. She manages the HOA social page and has the personality of a warning label. Every rule is her gospel. Every deviation a personal attack. She's made remarks before, casual at first. "Your daughter looks fine to me." Some people just want the easy parking spots. We brushed it off. You learn to when ignorance dresses as curiosity. Sophie recently earned her driver's license, something the doctors once said might never happen. It became her symbol of freedom, her small rebellion against every medical report that used the word limitation. That evening, she left to deliver documents for my office, proud, independent, her blue placard swinging from the mirror. I remember watching her drive away, sunlight glinting on the windshield, thinking, maybe the world was finally learning to leave her alone. But Maple Grove doesn't leave people alone. It polishes control and calls it community. And that night, someone decided my daughter didn't look disabled, enough to exist on her own terms. It happened. In less than 15 minutes, just long enough to remind me how fragile dignity can be in the wrong hands, Sophie had driven to the Maple Grove Community Center, a quiet lot beside the park. She parked neatly in the designated handicapped space, hung her blue placard on the mirror, and began gathering the files she was delivering for my office. Then, like a storm in heels, Karen Walsh appeared. She was holding her phone upright, already recording. "Excuse me?" she called out, voice sharp enough to turn heads. "You can't park there." Sophie blinked, confused. I can. I have the permit." Karen marched closer, camera trained on her face. "You don't look handicapped. You're walking just fine. I've seen scammers like you before." A couple leaving the gym stopped to watch. Sophie froze, clutching the envelope in her hand. "I have POTS," she said quietly. "It's a neurological condition." Karen laughed. "Sure it is. I bet your dad just bought that tag. What's wrong? Too lazy to walk a few steps?" Sophie's eyes welled up, but she stood her ground. "Ma'am, this is legal. I have paperwork." That word, paperwork, seemed to trigger something in Karen. She lifted her chin, voice booming across the lot. "I'm calling the police. Let's see that paperwork when the real authorities get here." People stared. Phones came out. Sophie backed against her car, shaking. When the police cruiser rolled in, lights flashing, Karen waved her arms like she'd just caught a criminal. "Over here! She's impersonating a disabled person." The first officer approached Sophie, calm but uncertain. "Miss, do you have your permit?" She nodded, voice trembling. "It's hanging right there," Karen scoffed. "Fake. They print those online." The officer examined it carefully, his demeanor shifting. "This is valid, ma'am. It's issued by the state, registered to a medical condition." Karen frowned. "Then why is she standing upright?" The officer straightened. "Because disability doesn't always look like you expect." By the time I arrived, called by Sophie mid-sob, the scene was unbearable. Police lights flickered against Karen's scowl. My daughter stood pale, humiliated, clutching the placard in one shaking hand. Karen turned as I walked up. "You must be her father. You should be ashamed, teaching her to take advantage of the system." I stopped a few feet away. My hands were steady, but my heart wasn't. "Ma'am," I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the air. "You just called the police on a disability you couldn't see." She smirked. "Someone had to protect the rules." I stepped closer, meeting her eyes. "No, you just broke one, and it's written in federal law." She laughed, still confident in her ignorance. But somewhere behind me, one of the officers was already noting down her name. The night wasn't over. The humiliation she meant for Sophie had only just begun to turn. That night, our home felt smaller. The kind of silence that follows humiliation isn't peaceful. It's heavy. Sophie sat at the dining table, her head resting in her hands, the parking permit lying between us like evidence of a crime she never committed. "She said I was pretending, Dad," she whispered. "Everyone looked at me like I was stealing something." Her voice cracked, and it wasn't anger. It was shame. Shame she didn't deserve. I wanted to rage, to march across the street and demand an apology, to make Karen feel every ounce of the pain she'd caused. But rage doesn't rebuild dignity. Truth does. So instead, I sat beside Sophie and placed my hand over hers. "You don't owe her proof, sweetheart. But I owe her the truth." Later that night, when the house was quiet, I opened my laptop. The police report had already been filed online, brief and factual. No violation found. Subject compliant. Complainant advised. But I wasn't looking for paperwork. I was looking for the truth that cameras can't distort. I opened the HOA bylaws, section 9.3, parking enforcement and accessibility clauses. There it was, a line that most people skipped. All designated handicap zones are federally protected spaces. Unauthorized interference may result in civil penalties. Karen had built her kingdom on rules. I was going to bury her in the ones she ignored. Before shutting down for the night, I rewatched the short clip a bystander had sent me. Karen's voice echoing, "She doesn't look handicapped enough." I paused the frame. Her finger was pointing at my daughter, and I whispered to myself, "She wanted proof? She's about to see it, in writing, in law, and in headlines." By morning, the neighborhood had already begun to arrange itself into a gallery of sidelong glances. Karen spun her version like a prize. Snippets posted on the HOA page that read, "Caught a faker taking advantage of handicap parking." Someone had to act. The comment thread filled with cheap certainties, "Good for you," and "Finally someone stands up for the rules." Sophie retreated. She stopped taking the long way to errands, stopped lingering by the cafe window. The bright independence she'd earned with small, stubborn steps felt fragile, like a ceramic bowl left teetering on a shelf. Neighbors who once nodded politely now averted their eyes as if the shame might catch on them. The HOA, under pressure to appear neutral, posted a formal note. "A parking compliance review will occur." That euphemism smelled of caution, the kind institutions use when they'd rather not choose a side. Meanwhile, Karen carried on, louder and more certain. She walked the block holding her phone up like a banner. I began assembling the things that mattered. Not accusations, but proof. Medical certifications, the DMV placard registration, a copy of Sophie's treatment plan that explained why standing could be a crisis, not a choice. I requested the plaza's CCTV footage and downloaded the short, grainy clip a bystander had taken on their phone. Karen's voice booming. Sophie's plea, the officers inspecting the placard. On my kitchen table, I laid every scrap out like a map. Each piece was a coordinate: date, time, witness, timestamp. I sent polite, professional emails to the HOA and to the precinct requesting official copies of the incident report and the body cam notes. I filed a formal complaint for harassment against Karen with the non-emergency line and copied the city's ADA liaison. I also reached out quietly to a reporter I'd once met covering municipal services, not to explode the story, but to put a careful, contextual record within reach. Neighbors began to speak up in small ways. Mrs. Alvarez, who'd watched the entire episode from her driveway, knocked on our door and handed Sophie a small note that said, "I'm sorry. I saw. Don't let them dim you." A local barista refused to serve Karen for a week, citing poor customer behavior. These were tiny acts, but they mattered. Karen, sensing friction, doubled down. She posted another long rant, legal language mixed with moral outrage, and the HOA left it unmoderated. It felt like the system was protecting habit, but the binder on my table grew heavier each day with facts and dates. They wanted an investigation into my daughter. I was building one into them. When I closed the binder that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, because they had turned Sophie's diagnosis into a spectacle. I was turning the spectacle back into documentation, and documentation, when done right, doesn't fade with a rumor. It endures. Karen still believed she was untouchable, a self-appointed guardian of neighborhood order who mistook cruelty for courage. But what she didn't know was that I'd spent the last 17 years working as a civil rights compliance officer for the city. My job wasn't just to enforce laws, it was to write them into systems that forgot compassion. I knew the Americans with Disabilities Act backwards and forward. I'd trained officers, city planners, and HOA boards on how invisible disabilities are just as protected as visible ones. And now, the same handbook I used to teach with would become the mirror in which Karen saw herself exposed. I started with the body cam footage. Through a public records request, I obtained the full clip from the responding officers. It captured everything. Sophie trembling, Karen shouting, the officer calmly explaining, "Ma'am, this placard is state-issued. She's legally allowed to park here." And then, the part Karen didn't know I had, the officer's private remark into his mic afterward. Complainant is belligerent. Likely unfounded claim. Next came the incident report, which documented Karen's false call under civil harassment and waste of police resources. I attached that to the city's ADA complaint form, cross-referenced with Section 12E132 of the ADA and Penal Code 148.3, which makes false emergency reports a misdemeanor. Then I compiled the HOA's own bylaws, highlighting the clause that required all residents to demonstrate reasonable respect and accommodation toward protected individuals. Karen had violated not only federal law, but her own rule book. I printed everything, labeled, tabbed, dated, and bound it in a thick report titled Case File. Unauthorized Harassment of Disabled Resident, Maple Grove HOA. When I delivered the first copy to the HOA president's doorstep, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "I didn't realize," she began. "You didn't ask to realize," I replied quietly. I delivered the second copy to the police department's community outreach office, and the third to a local ADA attorney who owed me a favor. By the end of the week, Karen's smugness had cracks. She must have sensed something. The way people stopped agreeing with her online, how the HOA removed her Parking Enforcement Committee title from their website. Still, she tried to bluff control. One afternoon, I caught her outside, pacing with her phone. "You can't scare me with paperwork," she said. I smiled faintly. "It's not paperwork, Karen. It's precedent." That night, I added one final page to the binder, a printed email from the city attorney's office acknowledging receipt of my ADA discrimination complaint. She'd wanted proof that Sophie's disability was real. Soon she'd have proof that her own arrogance was, 2. Signed, stamped, and legally binding. I'd spent my career teaching others how to document discrimination, but I'd never had to use that knowledge for my own child. This time, the case file wasn't academic. It was personal. I began mapping every step like a strategy operation. No emotion, no noise, just process. Step 1. The paper trail. I printed 3 sets of the binder, one for the ADA office, one for the city's Civil Rights Division, and one for the Homeowners Association Board. Each binder was sealed with a summary page titled Verified Federal Violation. ADA titled the 2 and 3 Harassment. Misuse of law enforcement, emotional distress. The language wasn't angry. It was clinical. That's what made it lethal. Bureaucracy respects precision more than passion. Step 2. Witness statements. I contacted the 2 officers who'd responded that night. Officer Hale replied first. We told her 3 times that your daughter's placard was valid. She refused to stop yelling. He agreed to sign an affidavit confirming that Sophie had been compliant and cooperative, and that Karen had escalated without provocation. Mrs. Alvarez, the neighbor who'd watched from her porch, signed hers too. I saw the girl crying. The woman kept shouting. I didn't step in, and I regret it. Step 3. The platform. I requested an official speaking slot at the next HOA meeting under the agenda item Community Accessibility Awareness. The president agreed, assuming I'd offer constructive feedback. I spent the next 2 nights crafting a presentation. Not one of outrage, one of education sharpened into truth. The first slide read, Disability isn't always visible. The second, but ignorance always is. I practiced the speech twice, steady tone, no theatrics. Each word carefully chosen to sound like calm authority. Laura watched from the doorway, arms folded, her face a mix of pride and disbelief. You're really going to do it? I nodded. Not to humiliate her. To correct her. Do you think she'll understand? No, I said, sliding the USB drive into my bag. But everyone else will. Step 4, the timing. 2 days before the meeting, I received an email from the ADA office. My complaint had been escalated to a formal investigation, with an assigned compliance officer and a pending notice to the J. They requested to observe the upcoming meeting as part of community assessment. Perfect. I printed their email and tucked it into the front of my folder. When the night finally came, I wasn't angry anymore. I felt something steadier. The quiet anticipation of consequence. Karen wanted to play judge, jury, and executioner in a parking lot. I was about to remind her what happens when someone who actually understands the law walks into the room, because justice, when prepared correctly, doesn't shout. It simply arrives on schedule, with documentation. The Maple Grove clubhouse was full that night, folding chairs in neat rows, the faint hum of gossip hanging like fog. Karen was already there, seated at the front, wearing a coral blazer that screamed confidence and control. Her laptop was open, a printed copy of the HOA bylaws resting on her lap like a shield. When I walked in, the whispers followed. Some pitied me, others waited for the spectacle they thought they'd see, a father begging the board for fairness. They were about to watch something very different. The president called the meeting to order. Next, we have Mr. Reeves, who's requested to speak on community accessibility awareness. Karen smiled thinly. Wonderful. Maybe we'll get some clarity. I stepped to the podium, connected my laptop, and waited for the projector to flicker to life. The first slide appeared. Disability isn't always visible. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. I want to tell you a story, I began, my voice calm. 2 weeks ago, my daughter parked in a handicapped spot, legally with a state-issued permit. A neighbor called the police claiming she was faking it. Karen's posture stiffened. Now, I know Maple Grove loves its rules, I continued. So let's review a few. Click. Slide 2. A scanned copy of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 2132, highlighting it is unlawful to harass or deny access to individuals with disabilities, visible or otherwise. Click. Slide 3. Still frame from body cam footage. Sophie standing beside her car. Karen in mid-shout, the police officer holding up the placard. Then the audio filled the room. "Ma'am, this permit is valid." "She's legally allowed to park here." The air went dead silent. Karen shot to her feet. You can't play that here without permission." The HOA president raised a hand. "Sit down, Mrs. Walsh," I continued, eyes never leaving her. "You demanded proof of her condition in public, on camera, and called emergency services to enforce your prejudice." I paused. "That's not concern. That's harassment." Next slide. The ADA investigation letter, the city's logo crisp under fluorescent light. "An open inquiry is underway," I said simply. "This community will be reviewed for compliance training." Karen's confidence began to crack. "I didn't mean to." "No one ever does," I said softly. "That's why education matters." And accountability. I clicked to the final slide, Sophie's medical statement, blacked out details for privacy, and a single sentence below it. Invisible does not mean imaginary. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping, hesitant at first, then steady, spreading across the hall until it became thunderous. Karen sat down slowly, her face pale, eyes glistening in a mix of anger and realization. I closed my laptop, gathered my papers, and looked around the room one last time. My daughter didn't deserve to be questioned for surviving something none of you can see. But I'm grateful, because now none of us can pretend we didn't know better. When I walked out, Karen didn't follow. She stayed seated, staring at the screen, frozen on that final line. And for the first time, the woman who had demanded proof was surrounded by it. By sunrise the next morning, the video from the HOA meeting was everywhere. Someone had recorded the entire presentation and posted it online with the caption, "HOA woman calls cops on disabled teen, then gets educated by her dad." Within hours, it spread across local feeds, then national ones. The thumbnail, Karen's shocked face frozen beside the ADA statute projected on the wall, became the perfect symbol of poetic irony. At first, the comments were all outrage. How do people still act like this in 2025? He handled that like a saint. She wanted proof. Now the internet has it. By noon, reporters started calling. The local news station ran a short segment using the body cam audio and excerpts from the HOA meeting. Their headline read, "False disability call sparks ADA investigation." Karen tried to fight back. She posted on the neighborhood app claiming context was missing and that she was concerned about safety, not disability. But the internet has no patience for self-correction after cruelty. Her old posts, complaints about ramps ruining the neighborhood aesthetic, jokes about lazy permit users, resurfaced like ghosts. That evening, a formal statement was issued by the HOA. "We condemn all forms of discrimination. The board will undergo mandatory ADA sensitivity training, effective immediately. Mrs. Walsh has been suspended indefinitely from her committee roles," the same woman who once strutted around, lecturing others about community standards, was now the example in every training slideshow about what not to do. 2 days later, a city investigator called to confirm that Karen's false emergency report had been classified as a misuse of law enforcement resources, a civil infraction with a hefty fine. And because it involved a disabled individual, it carried an additional penalty under ADA interference statutes. When the notice arrived at her door, the total read $6,200. That's what her arrogance cost. For Sophie, though, the victory came in quieter ways. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved when she parked. The barista at the cafe down the street started saving her favorite seat by the window. The city accessibility office even invited her to speak at a youth awareness event, not as a victim, but as an advocate. Karen, meanwhile, retreated behind her blinds. Her front yard, once a showcase of perfection, started to wilt, the flowers dry and uneven. The bleach-white fences no longer matched her reputation. I never gloated. I didn't have to. Every apology that arrived, every email from a neighbor saying, "We're sorry we didn't step in sooner," was proof enough. Justice didn't roar that week. It unfolded quietly, like a lesson written in law and empathy both. Because when ignorance meets evidence, one disappears. And that was the only disappearance Maple Grove needed to see. The world moved on, but Maple Grove never forgot. For the first time in years, our HOA newsletter didn't feature lawns or fence paint. The cover headline read, Accessibility Awareness Month, Building a Kinder Community. Beneath it was a photograph of Sophie standing beside her blue car, Max the service dog beside her, smiling shyly under a caption that read, Every strength doesn't look the same. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same parking lot that had once hosted a public humiliation was now the site of a ribbon cutting for newly marked accessibility zones, spaces painted in brighter blue, lined with anti-harassment signage and equipped with small cameras for safety. Karen didn't attend. Her house sat quietly 2 streets over, blinds drawn. The HOA required her to complete an ADA training course and perform 50 hours of community service at the local disability center. According to Mrs. Porter, she didn't speak much during those sessions, just listened. I didn't need revenge. Watching her clean the same center where my daughter once went for therapy was enough of a poem. That afternoon, Sophie stood at the freshly painted space, the one she'd been shamed for using. She looked down at the bold white wheelchair symbol and said softly, It feels safe now. Because it is, I told her. You made it that way. She smiled, sunlight glinting off her hair, and hung her placard on the mirror with quiet pride. Later, as we drove home, she asked, Do you think she'll ever say sorry? I thought for a moment. Maybe not out loud, but life already answered for her. At home, I watched from the porch as Sophie parked confidently, unbothered by stares or whispers. Across the street, a young mother helped her son out of a van marked with the same blue tag. No hesitation, no judgment, no shame. That was the victory. Not headlines, not fines. Freedom. The same space that once held accusation now held understanding. And in that transformation, I saw the purest form of justice, not punishment, but progress. Karen had tried to make my daughter prove her worth to Park. Instead, Sophie taught an entire neighborhood how to see. And when the evening sun hit the fresh paint, the blue shimmered like quiet forgiveness. Not for her cruelty, but for the blindness that had lived here too long. It's strange how peace returns. Not with noise, but with understanding. Months have passed since that day, and the neighborhood that once whispered now waves with genuine warmth. Sophie parks where she needs to without hesitation. Sometimes she even laughs when people glance at her placard as if to say, It's okay, you're learning. I still drive by that same spot at the community center sometimes. The blue paint hasn't faded yet, though the edges are scuffed from use. It reminds me that progress, like paint, needs to be maintained, retouched, protected, renewed. Sophie doesn't talk much about Karen anymore. When I asked her once if she still thought about that night, she said, Not really. I just think about how people don't always understand what they can't see. That line stayed with me, because that's all this ever was, a story about sight, about who chooses to see and who refuses. Karen's house was sold last month. The new family has wind chimes on the porch, and sometimes they ring at night when the breeze passes through. Soft, forgiving, almost like closure. I've stopped keeping binders and reports. They've been filed away where they belong. But every time Sophie steps out of her car, standing tall, calm, and unafraid, I'm reminded of one quiet truth. Justice doesn't erase the past. It redeems it, and some of the strongest battles are won not with anger, but with the steadiness of someone who knows they're right and doesn't need to shout to prove it. If someone humiliated your child for an illness they couldn't see, called the police, made them prove their pain, would you stay quiet or let calm truth do the talking? Every invisible struggle deserves the same respect as a visible one. And sometimes justice doesn't roar. It simply reveals. Tell me in the comments. What would you have done if someone called the cops on your child for not looking disabled enough? And remember, silence never protects the innocent. Truth always does. Subscribe for more stories where calm hearts deliver loud justice.